There was a moment when London existed without knowing it was London. That thought feels strange today, but for centuries, this place had no sense of destiny attached to it. It was not trying to become a capital or a symbol. It was simply where paths crossed and stopped for a while. People arrived, stayed, left, returned. Settlements formed not because of ambition, but because water was nearby, land was workable, and movement made sense here. The city was not planned, it accumulated. Like a living body unaware of its own shape, it grew through habit, not intention. What later generations would call importance did not exist yet. No one walked these spaces imagining permanence. Buildings were provisional, routes shifted often, and nothing suggested that this place would one day dominate maps and memory. London was not a project. It was a pause that kept extending itself, one ordinary day at a time, without ever realizing that history was quietly taking notes. If you want to understand this early London, you have to stop looking up and start looking down. The ground carried more memory than walls ever could. Beneath every step was a record of use and neglect, constantly rewritten. Mud swallowed footprints within hours. Straw scattered to soften the earth mixed with animal waste and broken wood. What touched the ground rarely stayed clean, and what stayed clean rarely touched the ground. Shoes wore out fast. Wheels carved shallow ruts that rain quickly erased. Unlike stone buildings meant to last, the surface underfoot was temporary by nature. It changed daily, sometimes hourly. This meant that memory did not settle easily. The city forgot itself every night and woke up slightly different each morning. Nothing about the ground suggested durability or pride. It was practical, dirty, and honest. In a way, it told the truth of the city better than any structure above it. This was a place built to function today, not to impress tomorrow. Before smoke became constant, London announced itself through scent. The air carried stories long before it carried pollution. Walking through the city meant moving through layers of smell that shifted from street to street. Near homes, wood smoke clung low, mixed with the dampness of old walls. Close to workshops, the sharp tang of leather or metal hung briefly, then vanished. Bread baking in small ovens released warmth that lingered only for moments. The river contributed its own presence, not overpowering, but unmistakable. Animals added another layer, subtle but persistent. These smells were not background details. They were information. They told people where they were, what was happening nearby, and sometimes who had passed recently. Air was not neutral. It carried context. Unlike later eras, there was no single dominant smell overwhelming the rest. The city breathed in fragments, and each breath was different from the last. What is hardest to imagine today is not what people heard, but what they did not. Before factories, sound came in bursts, not as a continuous hum. A cart passed, and then the noise was gone. A voice called out, echoed briefly, and faded. A hammer struck metal a few times, then stopped. Silence was not rare. It was the default state between events. The city did not roar constantly. It waited. This absence of continuous sound shaped attention. If people noticed small noises because they stood alone. A dropped object mattered. Footsteps could be followed by ear. At times, entire streets settled into quiet so complete that wind and distant water became noticeable. The city did not drown its inhabitants in noise. It spoke only when something was happening and then allowed space for it to end. Nothing in this London worked unless someone made it work. There were no systems running in the background. Every action required effort, timing, and presence. Doors did not open themselves. Light did not appear at dusk unless someone struck a flame. Goods did not move unless hands lifted them. Even the simplest task depended on waking bodies and available strength. When people slept, much of the city slept with them. Movement slowed. Activity paused. This created a rhythm tied directly to human limits. Fatigue shaped schedules more than clocks ever could. The city did not operate independently of its inhabitants. It existed only while they were actively sustaining it. When they stopped, it waited. If this way of life feels distant, it is because the city we know today rarely pauses. But before factories, London had no choice but to move at the speed of its people. That pace shaped everything that followed. When you reach the end of this journey through London before factories, take a moment to subscribe if you want to continue exploring hidden histories like this, and leave a comment sharing which detail surprised you most. Time did not move evenly in this version of London, and no one expected it to. Hours stretched or collapsed depending on light, weather, and exhaustion. A cloudy morning could feel endless, while a clear afternoon vanished too quickly. Without standardized schedules pressing from all sides, people experienced time as something flexible and responsive. Work paused when rain made it useless. Tasks stopped when hands grew tired. Waiting was common, not seen as inefficiency, but as a condition of reality. Even seasons carried different weights. Winter shortened days and patience. Summer expanded both. The city adjusted constantly, never assuming that tomorrow would look like today. This irregular rhythm shaped how people thought about effort and reward. Progress was not measured by output, but by completion. When something was finished, it was enough. Time did not demand acceleration. It allowed space for delay, repetition, and rest, not because life was easier, but because it could not be forced beyond its limits. When night arrived, London did not simply grow darker. It became smaller. Darkness reduced the city to fragments of light surrounded by uncertainty. Streets that felt familiar during the day turned indistinct, even threatening. Movement slowed not by law, but by caution. Those with candles or lanterns carried their own fragile islands of visibility, while others stayed where they were. Night belonged unevenly. Some people navigated it out of necessity, others avoided it entirely. The city reorganized itself after sunset, not through rules, but through fear, habit, and limited sight. Sounds traveled farther in the dark, and silence felt heavier. The absence of light reshaped behavior, turning ordinary spaces into boundaries. London at night was not simply the daytime city with less light. It was a different place altogether, governed by uncertainty rather than routine. Life before factories meant accepting that things failed often, tools broke, wheels splintered, roofs leaked, clothing tore. Nothing was built with the expectation of permanence. Repair was not an interruption to life, it was life. People knew how to fix what they owned because replacing it was not always possible. Materials were reused until they could no longer hold together. This constant cycle of breakdown and repair shaped a mindset of attention. Objects were watched closely for signs of weakness. Maintenance was ongoing, not scheduled. The city itself reflected this fragility. Structures shifted, streets eroded, nothing felt fully stable, and no one expected it to be. Reliability was temporary, and that understanding created a kind of resilience. When things failed, it was not a crisis, it was familiar. Without mass production driving urgency, London moved with a slower breath. There were productive days and unproductive ones, and both were accepted. Weather halted plans without apology. Illness paused entire households. Markets fluctuated without explanation. The city absorbed these variations instead of resisting them. It did not demand constant output. This slower pace did not mean life was calm or easy, but it did mean that acceleration was not yet the default response to difficulty. People adapted to circumstance rather than trying to overpower it. The city expanded and contracted emotionally with these rhythms, breathing in activity and breathing out rest. There was no illusion of constant growth. Survival, not expansion, defined success. What makes this moment remarkable is how little it hinted at what was coming. There were no clear signs that machines would soon redefine labor, sound, air, and time itself. No obvious warnings that speed would replace patience, or that smoke would replace scent. London, before factories functioned, it was imperfect, fragile, and slow, but it worked within its limits. That is what makes the transformation so striking in hindsight. The city did not collapse into industrial life. It stepped into it without fully understanding the cost. Standing on the edge of that change, this earlier London appears complete in its own way, unaware that it was about to become something louder, faster, and irreversible. Before machines learned how to multiply force, the body carried the entire weight of the city. Every movement, every delivery, every repair depended on muscle, balance, and endurance. London functioned through tired legs and aching backs. Strength was not an advantage, it was a requirement. Hands hardened quickly, not as symbols of labor, but as proof of survival. The body was the engine that never truly rested. When it slowed, the city slowed with it. There was no external energy to compensate for fatigue, no mechanism to take over when pain set in. People learned to measure effort carefully because wasting strength had consequences. A long walk, a heavy load, a repeated task could determine how much of the day remained usable. This dependence created an intimacy between work and flesh that is difficult to imagine now. Injury was not an inconvenience. It was a threat to continuity. A twisted ankle or strained shoulder could remove someone from daily life entirely, and because everyone understood this fragility, the pace of the city adjusted to human limits. Movement happened in waves, rising in the morning and receding by evening. The surprising truth is that efficiency was not defined by speed, but by sustainability. The city did not ask bodies to exceed what they could give for long. It accepted wear as inevitable and built routines around it. London was not powered by invention yet. It was powered by people, and that made every action feel heavier, slower, and deeply personal. If this journey through London before factories helped you see the past differently, subscribe to follow more reconstructions like this, and leave a comment sharing which hidden details stayed with you the most.